One of the areas of the justice system that really needs fixing has been how we deal with foreign criminals. Do we deport them? How do we deport them? Some people have been able to stay in this country for decades, while the Harper government has been making some moves, and, well, the usual suspects have called them outrageous, retrograde, and controversial. The man behind much of that, Immigration Minister Jason Kenney, joins me now. Minister Kenney, your latest move just before Parliament rose for the summer was to introduce the Faster Removal of Foreign Criminals Act. Is that the right name?
That's it. Okay. Bill C-43.
So this bill seems like a no-brainer to me. If you have a certain degree of sentence, you've committed a certain amount of criminal act in Canada, and you're not a citizen, we'll chuck you.
Yeah, essentially this bill is designed to close a gaping loophole that has allowed hundreds of convicted serious foreign criminals to delay their deportation from Canada for years. The problem is, under the current Immigration Act, anyone who is given a sentence of 6 months or more under the criminal code is considered a serious criminal. And if you're a foreign national, that is to say a foreign citizen, not a Canadian citizen who's here, you are then subject to deportation. But the problem is you're able to appeal the deportation order, and if you're a permanent resident, appeal the revocation of your permanent residency. And then if you lose that appeal, you can appeal it, and then you can appeal it. And you can also file, believe it or not, an application to stay in Canada as a foreign criminal on humanitarian and compassionate grounds. So what this bill does is to shut down all of those appeals, shut down that so-called humanitarian process for convicted serious foreign criminals, and it essentially says that if you're a foreigner in Canada and a criminal court convicts you of sentences you to a sentence of 6 months or more, as soon as your sentence is over, you will be deported. You won't get all those appeals.
There was one case that I remember reporting on, I believe Cambridge, Ontario, and a man had performed a violent armed robbery, locked up an old couple running a convenience store in the back. He appealed and appealed and appealed, and by the time all his appeals were just about over, he'd contracted a disease and needed medication, so he appealed to the federal court, and they said, humanitarian grounds, you get to stay because otherwise your medication will be too expensive in Vietnam. He was a nasty thug. But our system just gave him so many appeals. Yeah. This will end that sort of thing.
Exactly. That's exactly the kind of scenario we see all too often. I'm aware of at least dozens of cases, and there are probably hundreds more, where serious convicted foreign criminals, while delaying their deportation using these endless appeals, have gone on to commit new, fresh, and serious crimes in Canada. The worst case was that of a Jamaican convicted criminal named Clinton Gale, who was under a deportation order, got all these years to appeal it, and during that delay period, he managed to murder a uniformed Toronto police constable, Todd Bayless. So we're talking about really, some people say to me, isn't this unfair? Look, all we ask of you as a foreign permanent resident in Canada, as a foreign citizen who has permanent residency, to retain that privilege of residency in Canada, we just ask of you one simple thing, that you not go out and commit a serious crime. And if you do, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that you have therefore lost the privilege of staying in Canada. I guess maybe I'm a bit of a softie, but even I believe that serious foreign criminals should get their day in court. They should benefit from our tradition of due process and natural justice.
Yeah, you shouldn't be kicked out on hearsay. That's what happens in some of the countries that they're coming from.
You should get the benefit of due process. You should get a hearing at the IRB on our application to deport you. But you should get your day in court, not endless years in court. You should get due process, not an endless abuse of the process, and that's what C-43 tries to address.
You and I have talked about this on air before. I grew up in a neighborhood full of immigrants. In fact, the minority kids were the ones whose families had been in Canada a long time. And nothing makes immigrants angrier, and I know you've discovered this as Immigration Minister, than people that give legal, law-abiding, follow the rules, work hard, pay their taxes immigrants a bad name. So you've got the opposition and the left-wing media decrying these changes, as they've decried pretty much all your other changes. What's the reaction like as you go around as part of your job doing ethnic outreach and talking to immigrant communities?
Well, you've actually nailed it, because when we've talked about this, we get liberals, Bob Rae and his party, people in the NDP, and the left-wing interest groups and some media commentators, like from the Toronto Star, saying that that by trying to more quickly remove convicted serious foreign criminals, that somehow we're stigmatizing immigrants. But then I go and talk to new Canadians, and they say to me, "Why haven't you done this a long time ago?" In fact, I was doing a roundtable with Canadians who had immigrated from South Asia recently, and they said to me, "Why are you even going to let these people go through the legal process? Why don't you just deport foreigners in Canada the moment that they get they're charged with a crime?" And I said, "Well, because everyone gets due process and natural justice." So I'll tell you this: I think if new Canadians were to be voting on this law, they would make it even stronger than what we're proposing.
Numbers from 2010, more than 550 non-citizens as inmates in Canadian prisons. More than $100,000 per inmate is what it costs. That's a significant factor. So why wait until the end of their sentence? Why not say you've been convicted to a sentence of more than 2 years, or more than 6 months, I guess will be the new case if and when this law passes. You're out. We're deporting you now.
You know, that's a fair question. And in fact, in our platform, 2011 election platform, we committed to amending the Foreign Transfer of Offenders Act so that we might have then the authority to deport convicted foreign criminals before the end of their sentence in a Canadian prison. It's a complex area because some will say that we need the consent of the foreign prisoner to deport them. In my view, we don't need their consent to deport them. They've lost their right to stay in Canada. And if one of the problems we have is this. Under the current law, we can't deport them until their sentence is completed. So their sentence is completed, they're released. If our system is working well, they're released and kept in immigration detention.
And if not?
If not, they're released by the IRB out of immigration detention. And we've had convicted criminals pending deportation released from immigration detention following their sentence who have gone on to commit new crimes. And so what we're looking at doing is removing that risk factor of the release back onto our streets of convicted serious foreign criminals after their sentence by kicking them out of the country before their sentence is over.
We've seen before, it hasn't been in the news as much lately, but we have seen in the past people who have been ordered deported. They're actually deported, which at one point was a major feat in its own. Seems to be getting better, but still not good enough. So they're deported out, they're criminals. They come back in, they're committing more crimes, they're arrested. We find out we kicked these guys out last year. How do you fix that?
So this is a bizarre phenomenon where we have, in many cases, deported serious convicted foreign criminals who are no longer admissible to Canada and have later found out, then they show up in our criminal justice system again. And then we kick them out again. And then in some cases, I've seen in one case, 8 times a serious convicted foreign criminal deported 8 times coming back into Canada. So what they do is they go abroad, they secure fake documents, they obtain a counterfeit passport perhaps, they assume an alias, a fake identity, and they come back under a false identity. So we are now introducing, in fact, we now have the legal authority as a result of Bill C-31, the Protecting Canada's Immigration System Act. We have the authority now to collect biometric data, that is to say fingerprints and digital photos of foreign nationals seeking to come into Canada, so that we can, first of all, check their fingerprints before issuing them a visa against criminal and terrorist watch lists, and then if they've been deported before from Canada, for example, we'll be able to say, you're trying to come in under an alias, you're inadmissible, you're not getting a visa, you're not coming back in.
And that'll happen before they get here, because once they're here, it takes a long time to get them out of here.
Yeah, it'll happen at both stages. It'll happen when they apply for the visa abroad, and then we will verify that the person who arrives at the airport or at the port of entry is who they claim to be when they got the visa. So we'll be able to identify them overseas when they get the visa, and then identify them a second time through fingerprint data when they come into Canada. The United States has already done this. Australia has done it. The United Kingdom is doing it, and the European Union is going in this direction. It is a radical improvement in terms of immigration security screening, and it's a key part of our Beyond the Borders continental security approach.
All right. Immigration Minister Jason Kenney, thanks so much. What do you think of the changes that are being proposed, the changes that have been made? Email me, byline@sunmedia.ca. Stick around. More to come. How do you trick a license plate thief?
To change the head on the bolts you use to fasten your plate.
Because criminals will almost always go after the easy target. Does gun control work? The example of Chicago might say no. The example of Canada might say no, but that doesn't stop those on the left from saying shootings are proof we need more gun control. John Lott, the man that wrote the book, is coming up shortly, but first, mandatory minimum sentences. We're moving in that direction in Canada. The U.S. is starting to abandon the project, but are our examples, are our experiences the same? We've got one of the architects of the movement up next. This is Byline.